All right, here's a quick one for Clinton on the Scale Modelers Critique Group. Had a question about spraying fine with the Sotar and Tamiya paint. Right now I have in the Sotar some Tamiya XF4, yellow-green, just for contrast on this paint mule. It is thinned about 50-50, a little bit more with the Mr. Color Leveling Thinner, or Mr. Leveling Thinner. And we're going to spray small on this paint mule as a demonstration of how to do it. Now, part of the problem, besides the fact that it's going to be really hard to film, part of the problem when you're trying to spray small like this, especially for what he wants to do, is you need the paint thin enough to come out of the airbrush well, but not too thin that it spiders everywhere, which is one of the problems he's having. But with what he's trying to do, in terms of camouflage patterns, you're going to have to go over the same area a few times to get opacity built up, which can be a problem. And part of that, as we'll see in a moment, is if you go over the same area too quick, meaning you spray a little circle and then you try and do it again, if you don't give the paint enough time to dry a little, you're going to get spidering even more. As you can see where this part is with my fingerprint. We'll get to that in a minute. But as you can tell from this part of the wing, now you can tell there's some spidering there in a few places. The Sotar can do it, of course, but one of the tricks is you have to move very quickly with the airbrush, and that is something that just takes practice to do. It's not something that you're going to learn overnight. So, to me, XF4 thinned about 2-to-1. You don't want to go too much thinner than that, otherwise you're going to have more spidering and you're going to have more issues and you're going to have to spray faster. I have the compressor set to 10 psi. I have the MAC valve fully open. You can tell, you can barely hear the air coming out. You don't really want to turn the MAC valve down too much, because remember, that's not a pressure control, it is a flow rate control. And just think about putting your thumb over the end of a garden hose. You do that, you're not lowering the pressure in the hose, you're actually making the water come out faster. Same thing with an airbrush. You lower the MAC valve and you're actually going to be projecting the paint faster, which can be useful when you're trying to get in closer, but part of the problem with that is you end up not having as good as atomization, and you're going to have to spray faster because the paint's coming out a little bit faster. So enough talking, let's get to this. So the first thing I do, besides bump the camera, is pull the paint through. So full back on the trigger just to make sure the paint's flowing through. And then you get your subject, whatever it is, and it's hard to film around this camera, but let's see what we can do. As you can tell, there's a little bit there I've already done, but you're right up to it, air on, and you want to start moving as soon as you're spraying. And as you can tell, no spidering. Now let's do a little circle. Okay, and it's cold in here, so my hands are having a hard time, but you can see no spidering on that. It's a little fuzzy, but for this small, you can't really tell unless you're looking at it close like you are with the camera. But let's try and do a little bit better with the circle. See, at the end, I stopped moving and then put the trigger forward, and that got a little bit of a spit right there at the end. And what I do before I would move on, again, pull the paint through, and then let's do it again up here. Again, no real issues, but here's the problem. If you go too slow, watch what happens if you go too slow. See all that? That's part of the problem. Sorry, the compressor's going. That's part of the problem. You go too slow and you're spraying too much. Now you can drop the compressor even lower, but you're still going to have sort of the same problem. If you move too slow, you're going to get spidering. So let's move here. Demonstrate again. I'm barely pulling the trigger back. Starts small, but you can see I'm not moving, so it's just spidering. So you move slow, and we'll just do it like, say we're marbling. And pull the paint through again. It also helps clear off the needle tip. See, now that's a little bit fuzzier than what you want, and really I'm spraying probably half the thickness that you probably would be to do the camo pattern that he's trying to do. But it can be done, and if you want to get it a little wider, you move back from the surface a little bit. And there we have, well, I knocked the tripod. Let me get back up here. Sorry, it's really hard to film around this tripod. But if you're back a little bit further from the surface, I'm about that far away, about maybe an inch, if that. Now see what happens if I keep going over the same areas again? It's starting to spider a little because I'm not giving the paint enough time to dry before I'm laying more wet paint on top. So you want to do a few passes and then move on to something else. And you can tell that, again, fuzzy edges, because you're kind of far away, but for what you're trying to do, you kind of have to be kind of far rather than right up close, because what you're trying to do. Now, if you wanted to say you wanted to spray this little panel here, see, a little fuzzy, but not as bad. So if you have fuzzy edges, move in more. Fuzzy edges can also be down to pressure being too low and you're not atomizing the paint properly. But as you can tell from that, I mean, you can get real close and do real tight lines. As long as you don't stop bad like I did and you don't go over the same area too much, you can get pretty good small lines. Again, that's a lot smaller than what you're going to want to do with camo patterns. That's probably closer. And what you can do, if that, sorry, the compressor. What you can do, if you don't like those fuzzy edges, you can come back with the base color again and hit in the middle and a little bit of the outside, and that'll help do it, or filters or something after the fact to help blend those edges in. But again, Tamiya paint thinned about 50-50. No, I said about 2 to 1. Actually, sorry. 2 to 1, that's not 50-50. 2 to 1, 10 psi, because the particular gauge I have doesn't really do good measurements below 10. But you can do again, kind of fuzzy, but that's just sort of the nature of an airbrush when you're getting in. You move closer and that fuzziness goes away, but you have to move a lot faster. So let's see here, let's move in closer, but we're going to have to spray faster. As you can tell, the circle's not nearly as nice, but you don't have that fuzziness. But again, you're going to have to go over the same area a few times, and that's part of the problem. So, and for those that are worried about more area coverage, 10 psi in a Sotar is not a problem. You can, again, cover quite large areas without a problem. You can see how wet that paint went down. So spraying small, thin paint is important, moving quick is important, and figuring out a good distance away from the workpiece to get the desired effect that you're after. But again, nothing's going to beat practice. Buy a cheap kit, put it together, prime it, and then just practice. Practice, practice, practice. Because nothing is going to get you better results than practicing. So hopefully this helps. If not, too bad. So thanks.